So by now you've probably accepted that you're a natural storytelling expert already. That's because we view the world through the lens of story, and I've been banging on about this for a long time now. But so much of it is happening outside our field of awareness. But what happens then when we're able to change the narrative to something more constructive? What happens then when we are able to own our story? In this talk, I'm going to share with you how to own your story mindfully and 3 tips that you can take away when approaching this exercise. Hi guys, Calvin again. So we're talking about embracing our story, owning our story, so that we can come up with a new narrative, a new frame of reference on our hero's journey. So what do we mean then by embracing our story? Now, of course, as with all these things, I like to place a contextual frame around our discussion so that we know what kind of bounds we're playing within, right? So for this discussion, I'd say owning your story is being able to embrace all of your perceived successes and failures evenly, with a degree of equanimity. We are, I guess, the calm in the center of the storm, where it doesn't matter how successful that event of the story was, and it doesn't matter how painful that event of the story was. No, this doesn't matter to you, of course, it's important. We wouldn't be doing this exercise if it wasn't, but that we're approaching it with that degree of calmness within, that degree of stillness and even-handedness. So being able to embrace our story and own our story then is all about approaching our perceived successes and failures, our highs and our lows, our pleasant experiences and unpleasant experiences in a similar feeling, similar internal dynamic. So what's the first thing then we need to look at? Well, I think one of the really helpful things to realize first and foremost is that there is a difference between being a victim and having a victim mindset. The story that comes to mind is a famous Buddhist parable called the 2 arrows. And this story is very simple, and it talks about being shot by an arrow. Now, imagine you were walking through a forest and somebody was hunting a deer and they inadvertently shot you with their arrow. Or maybe they just didn't like you and shot you anyway. They were hunting you. It doesn't really matter. But you got shot with this first arrow. That pain that comes with that first shot is inevitable. There is no escaping the first arrow's pain inflicted on you. There's going to be tissue damage, there's going to be nerve damage potentially. It might have even gone as far as to shatter your bone, right? Depends how good a shot the person is, how far away they were. But there's going to be an inevitability of pain. But the second arrow is completely an internally governed thing. It is the shooting ourselves, if you like, with the suffering that comes after that. Oh my God, I've been shot by an arrow. What's going to happen to my life? Will I use my arm again? What does this mean? I'm going to get infected. I'm going to die. What are people going to think? And all these other sort of experiences are happening inside the internal storm because the way we've reacted to the first arrow, the second arrow then of course is self-inflicted. And this is what the Buddhists teach in their philosophy, that we are suffering through almost choice. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is a choice. We have a choice of how we react to the first arrow. So the main point here is when we are praising our life events, when we are looking at the story of our life, our narrative, the narrative that we're telling about the events of our lives, about our story, obviously that can change. And that can change depending on how we perceive those events. So I think if we can remember that being a victim, i.e. if you get shot by an arrow, you are a victim of an injury or of harm. But having a victim mindset, which is to say, the way we respond to these events is actually up to you, then it's very clear that we should make that distinction from the outset. The second thing I want to bring to your attention is that as we go back into the events of our lives and we reappraise them and reascribe meaning, because remember, that is how the story mind works. That is how our thinking, rational, logical mind internalizes the experiences that we have and makes sense of them. So as we go back through our life and we begin to look at those experiences, look for the gems in those experiences. Look for the gifts that are probably wrapped up tightly, lurking in the shadow of an experience that maybe potentially you hadn't really appreciated up until now. And with this new perspective of realizing that actually I am not a victim of my circumstances, I am not a person that's going to dwell in this slow, heavy, really destructive victim mindset. I'm going to reappraise these events from a new perspective. And this is where I've always advocated mindfulness meditation, helpful to cultivate those new perspectives, to zoom out from our thinking mind, to zoom away from the thoughts, because our thoughts are not necessarily true, and then we can develop some better perspectives. And then when we're there, we're looking for those gems. And the gems are things that really helped you to learn. They really helped you to learn, because without those, the experience would not have been the same. Or as Stuart Onan says, you couldn't relive your life skipping the awful parts without losing what made it worthwhile. So in other words, as we are praising the events of our lives, as we begin to weave the new narrative into the fabric of our story, and we are looking to share our gifts of that story with others, we're then able to inspire others on their own journey. So look for those things that you think, do you know, if I hadn't gone through that experience, then I would not have learned this thing that I've learned. If I hadn't had that terrible incident at work, then I would not have been a stronger leader in the area of communication. If I hadn't gone through the trials and tribulations of my marriage, then I probably would not have been a better husband. If I hadn't, you get the idea where I'm going with this, right? You're looking for the lessons, the gems, the gifts out of those experiences, which you'll be happy to share with somebody else for their own benefit. And finally, the third quick tip that I want to give you is that when you're going through this whole experience, remember that you don't actually have to do it, right? You do not have to do this. You have free will. You can do this if you want to. And this is one of the most empowering things of all as we begin to rewrite the narrative of our lives, of our stories, as we begin to approach it more mindfully, more gently, kinder to ourselves, with more self-compassion and with much more patience and acceptance. That, we're choosing to do this, or we're choosing not to do this. Or as Viktor Frankl once said, everything can be taken away from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So remember those three quick tips then, as we're beginning to gently go back into that overgrown path, into the stories of our lives, to weave new patterns of meaning into the story, into the fabric of our story, into our entire meaning that we ascribe to our lives. That a victim and a victim mindset are two different things. Remember to look for the gems in the experiences, those lessons that you would not have had had it not been for your perceived failures. And finally, remember that you are free at any time to do this or not. You don't have to do anything. There's no shoulds, there's no need tos. You can if you want to. I've personally found that really empowering for my own journey, and I find it very helpful when encouraging people to rewrite and own their story to develop new perspectives in a mindful way. Thank you so much for watching my video. Please like if you found it useful, subscribe, share, and if there's anything you want me to talk about in a future video, leave it in the comments below. See you next time. Bye for now.